Hang on. Welcome, everybody. My name is Rachel Dratch. I am the Director of Global Education at ANU, the Museum of the Jewish People. With me tonight, is the amazing Shuvi Hoffman from the National Library of Israel. We are thrilled to have you. Really honored to have you take us on a journey of primary text. And I'm going to give a shameless plug to say that if you have not yet been to the National Library in Jerusalem, you should go because it's wonderful. But if you have not yet checked out the amazing website, it's a treasure trove of resources and brilliance. And I'm just thrilled to have Shuvi here. And I encourage everyone to follow up with the resources. And we're going to have Shuvi was generous enough to offer us the slides and everything else. So I'm going to turn it over to Shuvi without further ado. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'm really happy to be here. I will start with a little bit of an introduction to the National Library of Israel, and then we're going to dive into our theme, which is crafting our story. I'll just say a little bit about myself. My name is Shuvi Hoffman. I live in Jerusalem, and I am the manager of global Jewish education at the National Library of Israel. And I'll tell you more about my work and what resources we have for you during this session. So here we go. Today we're going to focus on Pesach, and we're going to use Pesach as a case study to talk about an element that's very, very central in Jewish culture, which is the story. So before we actually get started, I'd love for people to write in the chat what Pesach means to you, especially this year. And I know for many of us, the meaning of different Chagim has changed over the course of the past year and a half, and new meanings that perhaps were maybe less central in the past have now really come to the front. And when you think about the values that Pesach represents, or the sentiment that you want to enter Pesach this year, please share in the chat what it means to you today. And Rachel, if you could kind of read off a few of the examples or a few of the things that people are writing.
Right, they're beautiful. Family appreciation, reconnection to the past, significance of learning and hearing from multiple generations at one table, special family time, first time my child will be old enough to participate. Oh, that's cute. Family, and my favorite part of the story is how I went out of Egypt.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. Really, really amazing. So yeah, Pesach has so many different layers, and it's definitely one of those times of year that we can connect to our families, to our stories. And I think every year we can approach this Chag in a little bit of a different way. And what I hope to suggest here in this session is a nice, maybe a new framing for you to think about Pesach. So just a few words about the National Library of Israel. The National Library of Israel is in Jerusalem. We moved into our beautiful, magnificent new building last October, actually. And if you haven't been there yet, you really could come and visit. And the idea of the new building of the National Library of Israel is not just a technical thing or an architectural element that is, again, beautiful in and of itself, but the idea of being more accessible, of serving as a resource for the entire public and not just for scholars or academics that maybe in the past were the main target audience of the library. And as educators, I think I highlighted this part of the mission statement of the library. Our mission is really to pass these treasures on to the next generation. So how do we do that? We're going to figure that out in this session. So just an overview of what the National Library holds in our collections. We have 5 main collections. Of course, the largest are Israel and the Jewish collection, but we also have a very big Islam and Middle East collection with very unique items from old ancient Qurans and other manuscripts and archives. And we also have a humanities collection that supports the other collections, and music. Music includes recordings and also music sheets. And as you can see, the library isn't just about books. Often people think of a national library. We do have millions of books at the library, but we have so many other treasures that are really worthwhile, and especially for educators, it's a treasure trove that we really want you to tap into. So be it the ancient maps or photos, it's postcards, it's posters, it's letters, it's drafts of poems, it's so many different things. So just to give you a little glimpse of some of the types of items that we hold at the National Library of Israel. What you're looking at here, for example, is a little note that Naftali Hertz Imber actually scribbled the one of the first versions of the Hatikva on a note when he was waiting for a doctorate in an office in New York. You can see photographs, Simchat Torah flags, postcards that Natan Sharansky sent home from when he was in prison. We have newspapers, recipe books, really so many different types of primary sources. And what I would like to show you today is how you can use those primary sources to create an experiential learning process for your students. So we offer professional development for educators around the world. And you'll see a glimpse of our educational resources today. And we're going to, of course, focus on the English, but we also have resources in other languages as well. So why do we love teaching with primary sources? Why do we think that that's an amazing entry point for kids to connect to the Jewish heritage and culture and history? So primary sources really offer an authentic glimpse into the past. We can really feel the texture of these items. We know that they belong to someone. They tell a story about someone who really owned them or wrote them or created them. And it really encourages the students to ask questions. And ultimately, we always want them to connect and think about their own piece, their own interpretation. So all of our activities also have a creative piece where kids can feel that they're also adding their piece of the puzzle to Jewish culture. So we promote skills that, again, we think are important for many other subjects and topics, but they can definitely come in handy when kids are trying to access these historical documents. So let's talk about crafting our story and think a little bit about what makes that story ours. So someone mentioned before in the chat about seeing ourselves as if we came out of Egypt. And that's definitely a very strong element of Pesach, which is not just to memorize and pass on a story from the past, but rather make it relevant, make it current, and add our own piece every single generation. So we're going to see a few really remarkable examples of just that. We're going to see how collective memory is formed because it's not just about the story we tell, it's the rituals that we link into the story. And of course, in Jewish culture, it's very much anchored in a specific date. So there's a real power to the idea of having the Pesach Seder every single year on the same date and knowing that everyone is doing the same ritual at the same time and telling the same story. And yet we see how this kind of unified practice has different layers of interpretation and different subjective takes on it in different places and at different times. So this is a really great foundation for us to add our specific layer. So today we're going to look into some Haggadot. And if you come to visit the library, you can actually see some of these items firsthand. But we also have many of these downloadable for free on our website. So it's really worth looking at the links. And you can basically browse through several Haggadot from different places, from different times, and really get a sense of what they look like and maybe even kind of imagine the people who were holding these Haggadot and actually using them. So just a few examples. This is one of the beautiful Haggadot we have that's in Hebrew, of course, but then it has an Italian translation. It's from Venice. And we know that this was a very, very special printed Haggadah. And we know that it actually inspired other artists and other printers to use some of the illustrations in later Haggadot. We also have more modern Haggadot, and we'll get a glimpse into that later as well. But the idea of taking the text, that's the traditional text, and even if you don't change the text itself, how you can add your layer or your interpretation or your kind of special energy by using illustrations. And we can see here an example from the Gaton, from Kibbutz Gaton or Neot Mordechai from 1941. Again, trying to make the text of the Haggadah as relatable and as contemporary as possible. One of the really amazing Haggadot we have, it's called the Rothschild Haggadah because it was owned by the Rothschild family. But it's really from Italy, from the 15th century. And I want to quickly show you a short video with some snippets of this Haggadah. This video and all the information about the Haggadot is on our website, and you'll have that link in this presentation. Okay, so that was just a glimpse into the Rothschild Haggadah. And I want to show you, besides the beautiful illustrations, we can see that, you know, Pesach is a holiday that really wants to engage kids and engage families in conversation. And sometimes, I don't know if you have this in your Haggadah, but sometimes there are actually some humorous things that kind of, besides asking questions and a lot of things that we do in order to make it engaging, this is something I really never paid attention to, but the Chacham, the wise son, is portrayed in a very interesting way. He looks like he's picking his nose, and it's a little bit of a funny image to be looking at during your Seder. But maybe it's a play on the words ve'af ata emorlo, which is what you're supposed to say to the wise son, and af in Hebrew also means nose. So I guess the illustrator thought it would be fitting to kind of incorporate that in the Haggadah. So we see that illustrators and artists had some liberty when they were designing the Haggadot. Everything I showed you from the Rothschild Haggadah and the other Haggadot, you can see in this link, which is basically a virtual version of our physical exhibit at the library. So we mentioned this quote already before, and the question is how we can see ourselves as though we came out of Egypt, right? And how do we basically own the story? We pass it on to the next generations, but we also take that kind of liberty of being creative about it and saying what we think about it and actually making it relevant. So I'm going to stop sharing for one moment. And there's a source sheet that we also sent out in advance. The source sheet is called Crafting Our Story. And in it are examples from other Haggadot that I didn't present right now, but that also kind of take the story of Pesach, take the text of the Haggadah, and really create a new Haggadah that speaks to the events of that historical period, of that historical context. So I don't know if we're going to do this in breakout rooms. Okay, so we won't do this in breakout rooms, but I think I would love to look together at this resource, and I'll maybe share my screen so that we can see it. And if you have it accessible on your devices, that would also be great. And we can send a link in the chat in a moment. But the idea is, and I'd love to, here, I'm just going to share that part of my screen for a moment. We'd love to just take a second to look at a few Haggadot that not only, I would say, illustrate the Haggadah in a way that tells their story, the story of their time, but sometimes even change the text of the Haggadah. We have Haggadot from the Kibbutzim, and we have Haggadot from different time periods that the traditional text was either altered, or maybe, you know, there was an appendix or other things that were added to make it kind of their own. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second where I'll show you this source sheet. This is a resource that you can use with learners at different ages. Like most source sheets, and we have plenty of source sheets on our website on different topics, I think the idea is not to feel obligated to look through every single resource and get through everything and answer all of the questions. The idea is actually to kind of skim through it and then maybe focus on one or two of the resources. So we're going to look at a few examples of Haggadot that tell a story. So the ideas and the prompts for the learners are to look at the examples of these Haggadot and basically to think about why it was through the Haggadah that they decided to tell their story. Because we'll see that each one of these Haggadot is telling a double story. it's telling the story of Pesach, traditionally through the Haggadah, but it's also telling another story of their time, of the people who made this Haggadah. So here's a Haggadah in Yiddish, written in Yiddish, and illustrated by someone called Moshe Altshuler. And it's called the Haggadah for Gläuber und Upikorsim, meaning it's for believers and unbelievers. And the idea is to take the story of Pesach and basically make the story of liberation also about the communists and the bourgeois, and the idea of who maybe represents freedom more than others. So that's one Haggadah, one example. Another example is from Germany. This is a Reform Haggadah from Germany, written in German, and part of the goal of creating this Haggadah was actually to make it accessible for younger children. And you can also see the cute illustration here in this page of the four sons. And the idea is also to make it current. So it doesn't end with L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, but rather next year in Worms and Maine, our home. So the idea is that we're so connected to Germany and we see our homeland as Germany. This was in 1927. Of course, we all know that in the next few years, how things will progress in Germany for the Jewish community. But at the time, that's a testimony to the sentiment of Jews in Germany at the time. Another fascinating Haggadah is it's called the Benghazi Haggadah. It's basically from Libya, and it's kind of like it was made out of scraps of different pieces of paper and different pieces of documents that people had found. It was drawn also, again, it was a little bit spontaneous. They kind of didn't really plan everything. Of course, due to the situation and they were amidst the war. But the idea is, and you can see in this little illustration, that it's not only about, you can see the pyramid on the top right, where it says under the pyramid, Me'avdut, and on the bottom left in the corner, Lechirut. So Avdut and Chirut, or slavery and freedom, aren't just about the pyramids in Egypt and coming out of Egypt in the Exodus, in the time of the Tanakh, in the time of the Bible. But rather, you see this Israeli flag, you see soldiers clearly. This is a reference to the events happening at the time. And a beautiful example of this is a Haggadah that we have from Kibbutz Be'eri. This was published in 1946. This was one of the first kibbutzim that actually created a Haggadah, an alternative Haggadah to the traditional one, as many kibbutzim did. Of course, now Kibbutz Be'eri is unfortunately famous and well known for other reasons, but it's really, I think, touching to see the heritage and the tradition that this kibbutz developed over the years. And this is one of the first kibbutzim who where they tried to take the text of the Haggadah that they were extremely connected to, and it really resonated with them, and make it their own. So as we can see on this page on the left, הנני מוכן ומזומן לקיים מצוות עשה, שמור את חג האביב, זכור את היום אשר בו יצאתם. And of course that's ממצרים, that would be the next page. And the idea is that this isn't a quote from the traditional Haggadah. It's an addition, but it's in the spirit of the Haggadah. But throughout this entire Haggadah, we can really see a lot of examples of linking the kibbutz life and the agricultural connection to the land of Israel and all of the rituals that go with that, to the obviously the Chag HaAviv, to Pesach, which is the holiday of spring. So that connection is very organic, even though it's not as, I would say, it's not as emphasized in the traditional Haggadah. And here's a little quote, and I'll read just a little bit of the translation. All other nights we would set the order of the Festival of Freedom while we were in the hands of foreign and oppressive regime, struggling for the building of an immigration to the land. And now we are free in the state of Israel. The gates are open to the returnees of the exile, and is the breath of our land in our hands to be settled. So again, these are just a few examples of ways that communities took the Haggadah, gave it their own personal interpretation, whether by illustrating it in a certain way or by emphasizing a certain theme, and even by changing the actual text or adding new text. And one of the questions I think that can really resonate with learners today in any age is, what are the elements of Pesach that you connect to, that are the traditional elements, and that you enjoy doing that ritual year in and year out? And at the same time, what are the maybe elements that you add, or your family or your community adds, in order to keep it connected to your life, to your experiences? And I think that one of the interesting things is, especially when we talk about art, and this goes to this question here at the bottom, sometimes it's actually the restraints that artists need to kind of, they paint in a certain style, or they write a text with a certain kind of structure. Often artists speak about how that actually enables them to be more creative, because they have those restraints, they have that structure, they're connecting to something maybe bigger than their own creative process, but at the same time, that helps them to kind of express themselves and add their own interpretation in a very, very creative way. So um, moving on from the Haggadot, we can see that making a holiday like Pesach relevant isn't only about reading the Haggadah. It's the message of Pesach that can really manifest in a lot of things that we see over history in Jewish culture and in Jewish history. So, for example, this is a poster from the published by the Council of Youth Movements in Israel in the 70s, of course, for to liberate the Soviet Jews. And it uses the slogan, of course, taken from the verses of the Bible, of the verses of the Tanakh, Shalach et ami, which is what Moses said to Pharaoh for the Exodus. And the idea is that this is a slogan, or this is a message that is still relevant, not only on Pesach, but in general, when we're calling for freedom and we're fighting for freedom, for the value of freedom. So it's very intentional to use that pasuk, and that became the slogan of the Soviet Jewry movement, as we know. And we can see it here in another primary source that shows Golda Meir, who was the prime minister at the time, in a rally for freeing the Soviet Jews. And again, I don't know if while I'm speaking, maybe you're looking at some of the questions here on the side, but we obviously can connect to these events, these rallies, and standing together in solidarity in order to free people. And of course, that all becomes more significant and gains more meaning and new meaning today, when we know that there are hostages still being held since October 7th. So we know what that feels like. We know how important that is to fight for their freedom. And knowing that these are things that our people have also experienced and dealt with before can really give us a sense of resilience and of hope. One of the most interesting items that we came across when we were kind of building this source sheet is this little ad, and it connects the Soviet Jewry movement with Pesach. And basically what it suggests here is that when you're celebrating your Seder night at home, then you should think about the Jews in the the Jews in the Soviet Union, who aren't free to sit with their families and sit on Seder night, and who can't celebrate the holidays of Jewish culture. And basically, this is an invitation to keep a space, maybe save a space in your mind, but not only in your mind. The last paragraph suggests that you should leave an empty chair on your Seder table for the people who are in the Soviet Union and who are not free. And again, this rings very familiar when we know that today, everything that has to do with saving that chair for the hostages and waiting, and we know that that's I would say a ritual that people have been practicing in Israel and all around the world in order to really symbolize this idea that we're all waiting for the hostages to come back. And even when we celebrate the most important holiday of our calendar, we have them in mind. So this idea of crafting our story, I'm going to go back to that. It's about taking the historical and traditional story, making it our own, and keeping it current and keeping it relevant, so that it continues to be something that resonates with us and with our learners throughout the year. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that I can go back to the presentation. And if any questions, in the meantime, if anybody wants to ask, you're welcome to.
I, I wanted to say,
Yeah.
Shuvi, first of all, that this is so beautiful, and I can imagine a million interesting conversations to have using these texts, and as such a richness. And I'm wondering if the Seder, like it's such a unique space where you're encouraged to add. V'chol hamar beharei ze meshubach. So it's one of those unique spaces in Jewish text that we are encouraged to add and develop and be creative. And maybe I'm wondering partially if you think maybe that's why people really engage with that as an image. Besides that, it's such a powerful image. I'm curious what you think.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's some points in our calendar that are more open to interpretation, and I think there's something about the Seder that puts the questions and the children in the center that kind of helps us as adults also practice that idea of being inquisitive and being curious and asking and engaging with these things and not just accepting them, but challenging them sometimes or trying to make sense of them. So I definitely agree that there's something about the Seder night. I don't think it's there. There are multiple reasons maybe why the Seder is so I would say celebrated so largely, and so like so many Jews who maybe during the year don't connect to every holiday. There's something about Pesach that connects them. Again, I think it has to do with a lot of things, but definitely this invitation to ask questions, I think makes a really big difference. And I think as educators, we should really learn from that, because the more I think we invite questions from our students and we're really genuinely open to those questions and we really want to hear their interpretations and their creative ideas, then I think they're gonna bring them into the space and they're gonna share them.
Shuvi, I just want to read something in the chat. One of the participants wrote, "It's so sad to me that what we did in 1969 for Russian Jews has come back in 2024-25 for other Jews held against their will. The empty chair continues."
Yeah. It is true. It's very sad. Again, I mean, I think we can choose to draw strength also from that and to be inspired by our from former generations who didn't give up, and we can continue to fight for freedom. So, um,
Well,
what I'd like to,
I was gonna
yeah,
just add that we have language in the Haggadah for understanding and unpacking it. It's sort of making it's a sense making device for us. Even the chair, right? So
yeah.
that gives me actually I agree that it's sad, and it's also very comforting that we have a framework with which to understand them. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, yeah. So again, I think that Pesach is just a case study, and it's just maybe a really great example of how we can trace different things from our tradition and different things that go back so many, many years and are so rich, and yet they are open to our interpretation. And I almost want to say it's not that despite their antiquity, we're allowed to interpret them. I want to argue that if we don't interpret them, they lose their value. They then the idea is that we take ownership and we take responsibility and we feel compelled to also add our own piece and not just to pass down what we've received. What I'd love to show you now is also a few examples of other types of activities that we suggest doing with primary sources, just to give a sense of in terms of the pedagogy, how we envision using primary sources to create meaningful learning experiences. So I'm going back to my presentation, and just to show you a quick few examples of how we can use primary sources to create these special learning experiences. So the whole prism of this, the next few slides, is what do we do with the primary source? And the idea is, and I'll give you a hint, it's not just about learning the primary source itself, it's learning about ourselves. And the question is how we use the primary source to help us do that. So one way of using a primary source is it tells us a story and we're listening to that story, right? So in different programs that we have, for example, in a program we called Faces and Facets, we explore different elements of what makes a Jewish community. And for example, we can look at a Torah scroll. We're not going to see this video now, but it tells the story of a community in Rhodes in Greece through this artifact, this primary source, the Torah scroll that actually survived despite everything. And we know that the majority of that community was exterminated in the Holocaust. But this Torah scroll was hidden by the Muslim neighbors in Rhodes. They kept the Torah scroll in a mosque, and then after the Holocaust, it was revealed and ultimately donated to the National Library of Israel. So we can look at it as a text. It looks like a Torah scroll, okay, but it also tells the story of a very special community that maybe not everybody knows about. And we also have a bar bat mitzvah journey that also uses primary sources to tell the story of becoming bar or bat mitzvah and joining the Jewish community. Another way of thinking about a primary source is using it as creative inspiration. And that's something that, again, we saw this with the Haggadot, and we have other lesson plans and other resources that invite students to do similar creative activities. So, for example, for Purim, which is coming up this weekend, we can invite students to look at this beautiful illuminated Megillah and get a sense of the types of illustrations we can see here. Of course, even if you don't see very closely, you can imagine these drawings don't really resemble the Jews in Persia who actually lived in the time of Megillat Esther, but more likely they resemble the Jews of Italy living in the Middle Ages, which is when this was created. So the idea is to learn about the community that created this Megillah, and then create your own. You could create a Megillah that would express your community life and the kinds of people that you meet every day in your community. Another way of using primary sources as creative inspiration is through posters. We have a Yom Ha'atzmaut poster competition that invites kids again to look at old posters for Yom Ha'atzmaut from throughout the years, and also other items, and then go on and create their own. So you can see that this was a poster for the peace agreement with Jordan that then turned into the inspiration for a Yom Ha'atzmaut poster that someone created, or an ad for citrus fruit that was obviously the Israeli food that's the healthiest thing that you can do to build your body and your muscles becomes bamba today. And this is by a student from Germany who used that as the inspiration. And here are some examples of the posters that won last year. Another way of thinking about primary sources is they help us uncover something that we can't learn about in a history textbook. We can't learn about even if we read quotes from historical figures. We created this program called Time Capsule, where we basically invite kids to look at primary sources for about five women in this case who made an impact, who made a difference in Jewish or Israeli history. So Golda Meir might be remembered mostly for the Yom Kippur War, but her career, her political career, and everything she did before is often forgotten. So we created a timeline activity to really show people a little bit more who Golda Meir really was and the types of things that she accomplished and she did at a younger age and as a young politician. And another example of that is to look at photos, for example, of Hannah Senesh or Nomi Shemer. In these two examples, they weren't they didn't start out as iconic poets or and each one of these figures has their own life story. They were part of a family. They grew up. They had a childhood, and it's really, really, I think, important to also see that personal layer of history. And last but not least, one of the things that we love doing with primary sources is using them as a kind of a riddle. and inviting kids to try to decipher certain things or try to figure something out. That also promotes the skills we talked about in the beginning, which is analysis skills, taking a closer look, paying attention to detail. And primary sources can get the kids curious. And if we ask maybe the right questions and we make it playful, they're likely to kind of dig a little deeper and learn something new. So before we end, I just want to mention a project that's underway at the library since October 7th. It's called Bearing Witness, and I'm inviting you as educators to consider contributing or sharing something with that collection. It's a huge scale project, and it's collecting everything and everything and anything from October 7th and onward from Israel and from around the world. So if there's a flyer or a poster or something that you have from your community, or maybe something that the principal said at a rally or in the school, that would be an amazing thing to preserve for future generations. Here's the QR code if anyone wants to use it. And the idea is that, again, without thinking about it too much, the library really wants to preserve anything that you think is valuable. And so I'm inviting you to do so. And if you have any questions, we can also help you figure out how to share and what to share. So just to kind of summarize, I see this type of session or this webinar as a beginning of a connection to the library. I gave you a glimpse into some of the resources that we have. You can access the primary sources directly, but you can also use the materials that we create in order to kind of make them more accessible for educators with some worksheets and other activities that are already made for you to use. And as you can see, we see this as an ongoing resource for you. You can use our online materials, you can speak to us, you can participate in professional development. And of course, if you're visiting Israel, you should be in touch and come to see the library itself. So this is our upcoming seminars in the summer. This is our kind of our major professional development opportunity. And if you're interested, I'm happy to tell people more about this, and you can contact me by email. Thank you very, very much. And I hope we all have a very meaningful Pesach. And we really think together about how to make this year's story of Pesach most meaningful and add our piece for future generations as well. So thank you very much.
Shuvi, I thank you so much for teaching us and for inspiring us. Mamash Chazak. I really appreciate all the work that you do at the library. You know, you and I speak often at ANU. We have this amazing My Family Story project, which is where students research their family roots, and it's this crazy awesome project for students in middle school. It's been going for 30 years. It's in 30 countries. And it's interesting because they create primary resources. And it's I love how symbiotic our relationships are. And I love supporting your work. I wish you and your team so much hatzlacha. And I encourage all of our educators to reach out to Shuvi and her amazing team. Meanwhile, may we hear
Thank
good
you.
news. Besorot tovot, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.